Welcome everyone to the IFAN webinar, and let me hand it over to Virad, IFAN President.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. It's exciting to see all of you. I see a lot of familiar faces and a lot of people that I never met before, so I'm really excited about that. My name is Oren. I'm the president of IFAN, the International Federation of Standard Users. I'm really delighted to see so many of you. You all have a strong interest in this critical topic. Standards are the building blocks of our modern world. However, their true impact relies on their effectiveness. So here we are in IFAN. We are the voice of standard users. We advocate for user need to ensure standards are user-centric and address real-world challenges. I'm confident that today's discussion will provide valuable insights into the potential of smart standards. I would like to invite all of you, those who are not part of IFAN yet, to come and meet us all and be a member and join us and help us influence the standardization world in a manner that will make the standards user-friendly and effective. So enjoy the webinar.
Thank you, Virad, for that overview. I will go ahead and cover the webinar logistics first before getting started. So for today's webinar, we have a panel session here, and we have multiple speakers. I encourage you to use the chat feature in the Zoom to submit any questions. We will be having a live Q&A session after our discussion as well. With regards to the recording, it will be available on IFAN website 2 weeks after the webinar. We also plan on sending out a survey at the end. So looking forward to your participation throughout the webinar. With that, let me go ahead and get started. So in today's webinar, we have 4 speakers. We have Leslie McKay, who's a Director of Digital Standards Development at SAE International. We have Alton Sanders, a Senior Project Engineer at within the Product Standards Office at the Boeing company. And we have Nelson Assal Filho, who is a Director of Standardization at ABNT. We also have David Nix, who is the Digital Transformation Officer at IEC Standards. And they will be introducing themselves when they speak up in more detail. So looking forward to all. And let me just introduce the panel session and the topic itself. Let me just check to see if one of my speakers have joined us. David, have you joined us? Okay. Well, if not, then let me go ahead and get started. So again, welcome everyone. My name is Muhammad Ali, and I'm also the IFAN Working Group 16 Chair, which is on education and training. I work as a Senior Standard Strategy and Policy Leader within HP. With this topic of smart standards, it's very close to me, as you know, we are indeed in a cyber physical age now, where almost every company is going through some sort of a digital transformation efforts, to reduce manual work, increase efficiencies, and save costs, especially with the emergence of AI. And standards world is no different. And, in the context of standards development, digital transformation is how standards are developed, how they're delivered, and how they're consumed. And we know that our future standards users are virtual learners. They want the information to be easily accessible. They need the information in different formats available other than just PDF. And we need to be able to use the digital tools to develop standards from drafting all the way to publication. Collaborate digitally, deliver the standards in the formats that are currently available, and be able to utilize the information that is available in our standards to reduce the time that is needed to digest those standards, make those information easily accessible in different formats, and reduce the time to market for products for conformity assessment purposes. So today, we are going to hear from each of our speakers on progress with respect to SMART and the impact on standards users. With that, let me get started with my first speaker, David Nix, who's going to provide us an overview of ISO IEC SMART. David, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Ali. Everybody, thank you for having me today. I'm pleased to be here on behalf of both IEC and ISO to share with you the work that has been ongoing now for the past couple of years on SMART, the progress and the direction that we're going. So I am the Digital Transformation Officer for IEC, and in that role, I partner and work collaboratively with ISO and the team there to ensure that what we're delivering from a SMART perspective meets the needs of our members and customers across both IEC and ISO. This work is a culmination of 2 years of experimentation and design work, which has led to the fact that IEC and ISO need to work jointly to deliver the future of SMART. Over the last 2 years, we've been quite focused on thinking about the end user, what their needs are. And last year, we conducted many pilots that tested out not only our ability to execute the technology, to transform content into smart data and smart content, but also to test out what end user needs are, how they might interact with smart content and use that to deliver value in their companies. What we found out of those pilots was that we can in fact transform our standards content into smart data. However, there are a tremendous number of changes that we need to consider making relative to how we build, author, and publish standards in our current formats. The level of consistency that we need to drive in order to create better, smart content in the future is critical to our overall success. In addition, as we think about value-added data that's incorporated around our smart content, around our standards, we need to think about new processes, new tools, and new ways of working that reduce the amount of human effort necessary to generate that content. What we can't do is say we're going to create smart content by charging 20,000 experts around the world with doing 10 more hours of work a day in order to create that. What we also found is that the needs and the use of smart data and smart content can be quite specialized. There are certain industries, certain size companies that have very specific needs for how they interact with smart content. They want that in very specific ways, and they want to be able to implement it into their systems in very specific ways. At the same time, we also know that there are a set of common needs and common capabilities that make life easier for our average user. And so we are now focused on how do we think about building some of those common tools that anyone could use to access IEC and ISO smart content. But then also, how do we build partnerships and capabilities to deliver on highly specialized last mile solutions into specific industries or specific size companies to ensure the use of smart content. While that sounds something that's been done before and maybe easy, the considerations that we've seen aren't necessarily technical in nature. Most of the considerations for success there are business model considerations, intellectual property management considerations that really ensure that we're not just providing a tool into content that end users can't use, but that we're providing a tool and a capability around using content to drive efficiency across the industry value chain. This year, we're continuing on the work from those pilots and those learnings to create an MVP solution that we believe in early 2025, we will be able to launch in certain markets. We're also working with our OSD, our online standards development team, to incorporate changes into our authoring process that enable us to create higher quality content and drive smart standards in the future. And we're working on many of the legal and business considerations that would tie all that together to make it successful in 2025 and going forward. At the same time, we're continuing to build a vision for what the future of this looks like. We certainly believe that IEC and ISO together can have a strong market relevance and a strong solution. But if that's true, then we also believe that IEC and ISO plus their members can have an even stronger market relevance and value proposition. And if that's true, then all of the standards organizations together can provide even more value to industry and the overall value proposition. We're crafting a vision for how we can bring all of that together. It's not a small vision, it's a huge vision, and it will take many years to get there with many steps along the way. But the first step is to articulate the need and the value of moving towards that vision. We're focused on doing that this year. We look forward to the next steps, and we're sure that we can continue to make progress, which will move IEC and ISO into the 25th century of standards and not stuck back in the 1980s of publishing PDFs. Thank you for your time, and I hope that answers or hope that shares some perspective to where we are and where we're going.
Thank you, David. That was an excellent overview of where we are with ISO and IEC Smart. Let's wait on questions for David until the end of our panel session, and then we will take all questions during the live Q&A, if that's okay. Let me get started with our panel session. The first question I have is regarding the standards development process itself. And I'll start with Leslie. Leslie, in your view, how is the standards development process going to be impacted by smart standards?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Leslie McKay. I am Director of Digital Standards Development here at SAE. So I believe that, we're really going to have to change how we write standards from the start. There's a lot of things we take for granted today as we author standards in Microsoft Word, and we think about authoring standards as authoring a document. We need to start thinking about how we are authoring data elements, and that we are going to be converting portions of standards into data. And that means that we can't necessarily, we might need to handle things that we didn't handle before, like blank cells in data tables, or in making sure our requirements statements are explicitly identified and tagged, tagging various kinds of information as different kinds of information and standards as information that we're going to want to convert to data. And it goes beyond requirements. I feel like there is a very strong, I think requirements are important, don't get me wrong. And I think it's very important for us to identify requirements, but we also need to understand that we are going to need to identify more than just requirements. There's manufacturing processes, there's testing procedures, there's operational processes. Those are pieces of data people might want to pull out to automate our smart manufacturing systems, or to provide efficiencies by simulating different processes and seeing how they can be made more efficient. And I think that those are things that we need to consider when we're authoring standards, and start breaking down the information and thinking about what are the different, how does this break down, and what are these pieces of information? How do they need to map to the various tools that people are using today? Because they're using SysML to model and simulate things. I'm getting a lot of demand for standards in SysML. They're using requirements tracking systems to track and provide traceability, and they're using even SysML to provide traceability beyond just simulation. So I think it's very important to really think about how the various pieces of information and standards are going to be used. And when we think about authoring and think about what do we need to identify? What do we need? How is that information going to be used? And how do we best author it so that it can be provided in a digital context without losing some of its meaning?
Great. Thanks, Leslie. Let me just check with my other panelists to see if they would like to add anything to that before we move on. It seems like we have a question. Yeah, go ahead, Andreas.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just a short confirmation. I see it very much the same way. It is really important to see that we are not have only the identification of requirements or ontology-like applications. I think what we generally need on the ISO IC level is a component description, what is part of or what is from a customer point of view and end user point of view in the expert departments part of a smart standard. What are the things they are wanting to do? We have a lot of user stories and we can derive a lot of things from there. That means I believe, for instance, okay, identifying provisions is one thing we already know. But the other thing is make tables really machine interpretable or machine readable. This is something which has been only touched at the surface. The other thing is improve the semantic markup of formulae, values, and units. Yeah, this is something which only has been touched at the surface. What I think is also part of a smart standard. What I would expect from a smart document is also two things. One is to support more the idea of topic-based writing, because we cannot solution long-term the problems of maintaining provisions if we remain on a document level. So we will have a process of going more in the fragmentation of documents and working with smaller components and then generate the documents from there. Yeah, this is a long-term evolution. But maybe a low-hanging fruit could be something which is really painful if we look on the regional differences. Units, decimal separators, and 1,000 spaces. Yes, this is something which is really, I think, a trouble also for ISO IEC, for all standards organization. And we have shown and implemented in a POC in our production system, if you have an XML-based content and you use a generic identifier, you can, for instance, generate, for instance, for the US market, the same document from the same source. You can, for the US market, generate this document using a decimal period. And for the European market or the comma countries, a decimal comma. And so you can get rid of all that competing or competitive attraction to the directive teams to change from comma to period or vice versa. Yes, so we can take out also a lot of conflict potential, and nobody is surprised. Every Microsoft application or Windows application can do this today. Your operating system can do it today. You can choose the way how the data is driven and all that stuff. This is also components for smart standards.
Yeah, excellent.
We need to prioritize we need to prioritize and identify and prioritize which is next need and what is future need. That's obvious.
Sure. Yeah, excellent perspective, and we're going to touch on that a little bit later on as well. But thank you for bringing that up. Just so to kind of follow up on what Leslie mentioned regarding digital components and importance of that, let me go to Alton and ask him if he would like to expand on that from his perspective. Alton?
Yeah, hi, thank you. So we had forms of digital standards that we've been experimenting with and using in production in some forms for 20 years. The solution for and let me just say, this is mostly in the area of engineering standards for product definition. So we have standards for digital standards for standard parts and for manufacturing processes. These are probably the most mature part of our thing. And we're doing a lot of work in how to do digital standards for manufacturing process instructions. So the generic, what I would say generic SysML or RecIF requirements list type of problem is not one that my team has really leaned hard into, and I'm glad to hear Leslie and others talk about what they're doing in that space. Our challenge has been, how do you take a 12-page document that describes some fastener family and turn that into 200 different fastener definitions and include CAD model shapes and all the material attributes, and then how you bring in attributes from other standards, because this is also part of the problem with the definition of standards, is that they're all built on somebody else's standards, and so much of the important content isn't in the traditional document that we have today. Some of my important content is in one of Leslie's documents, or it's in somebody else's document. I've got to pull that attribute data out to build the full definition of what we have here. So I think that it's an important consideration to build an environment where all these standards from multiple standards developers and from internal standards published by OEMs like my company, speak the same language, because we're going to have to do a lot of data interchange, and it becomes a big challenge when I say, well, if I'm going to pull some material content from one of SAE's standards, and I understand how SAE publishes that content, and then I am equipped, either because it's normal, or I've got a special interpreter to know how to read an SAE standard and bring it into the format that I need to have. I think David Nix did a good job of talking about that in the last few miles. And then if I say, well, I need an aerospace industry standard material also, and are they in a different format? Is their structure exactly the same as what SAE is using or some other material standards organization is using? And if I partner with, Lockheed Martin or some other company that is working on a joint project with us, are their standards in the exact same format, or do I have to build lots of interpreting engines for every single kind of publisher out there? And likewise, are people going to be able to read my standards in the same way? So I think it's important that that industry works together to be open and solve these problems, and avoid getting into a world where there are a lot of proprietary formats, digital and useful and wonderful as they may be. I think this needs to be, an open and shared conversation so that all ships will rise with the tide.
Yes, absolutely agree. So really, the importance of interoperability on using the content from the standards as we move into that smart standards phase. And talking about that, let me just expand more on that topic and go to Nelson. Nelson, with what Alton said about interoperability and the importance of that, how do you think the access to standards and delivery of standards are going to be impacted by SMART?
Yes, I think Alton touched a very relevant issue. Interoperability is crucial, and we need to avoid having an ecosystem, a chaotic ecosystem where we have a proliferation of incompatible patterns of data. So I think ISO and IEC initiative is really very good, the SMART program, that to standardize a format, a structure of sharing information, also with APIs in the future, etc. But I think we need to think on this last mile. And for example, in the beginning, it was said that standards are a very important piece for development, etc. But inside this piece, we have many pieces, and I think we are unleashing the granular power of the data inside standards. And this is all about, we need to have the possibility to connect maybe to business processes in the end, for example, to ERPs or to other business-driven or issue-driven applications. And I think for that, we really need to think in business models and an ecosystem for this business model. For example, I keep thinking on, for example, the Apple Store business model, where you have an ecosystem of small businesses, because I don't think we are going to be able to do everything by ourselves. We need to have a consistent model that we could attract the intelligence that it's outside our reach. So people will come to us, will work in a compatible way with our data, and we will provide data to everyone. So, for example, if I have a provider that likes to and has an application for environmental issues, for example, they can use and they will pay, and we will have a business model to bring value to all parts. For example, one new business that is coming up is circular economy. And I used to say that circular economy is not about just the circularity of things, of physical things. It's mostly about circularity of data. Data needs to be managed, and usually needs to be managed amongst people and companies that sometimes are not aligned in the same value chain. So we need, and for that, smart standards will, this model of smart standards will be very useful. So even for public purchase and for supply chains connections. So we need to think about not in a one-to-one basis, but in a collective, in a value chain model or supply chain models, or even with this kind of ecosystem of providers. Okay. So this would be my
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Nelson. Let me just check with Leslie, Alton, or David to see if they have anything else to add on access and delivery before we move into consumption and implementation.
I can jump in a little bit. I mean, I definitely agree with what everyone is saying, that people aren't going to consume standards the way they consume them today. They're going to want to get them in the ecosystems that they're working within, whether it's Dassault, whether it's Siemens, whether it's IBM, whether it's SAP. They're going to want to get the information they need however they want it. And that largely means that the information from standards is probably going to be delivered via APIs. And we need to think about, as a lot of standards development organizations, they're publishers. They're used to publishing documents and so forth. And so I know at SAE, and I'm hearing from many other standards development organizations, they're having to bring in new skill sets to be able to provide the types of solutions and provide standards in the way that people are going to want them in the future. Because just publishing a document and printing something out is not going to cut it. So I do think that that we need to be more flexible and we need to get the right skill sets in place so that we can provide these solutions. And when we talk about interoperability, we need to realize that, yes, we do need to come to standard common, agree on standard common interoperable formats, but we also need to agree on how are we going to meet those formats. SysML is a standard format, but how I might model a standard or SAE might model a standard versus how another person may model a standard might conflict very differently, and that doesn't mean they're going to be interoperable. So it's going to be very important for us to establish ontologies and establish agreement on things of how do we want to have standards represented digitally in a way that when I'm building something, no one's building anything with SAE standards alone. They're using ASTM, they're using ASME, they're using ISO, they're using a whole host of standards, and they're going to be taking pieces of those standards now without, in the future, without necessarily having the context of the full PDF. So when we think about distribution, we need to think about how our standards are going to be consumed. And it really brings a very different perspective on interoperability than we've ever had to worry about in the past.
With that, let me go to Alton, just to continue that discussion. Alton, how do you think the consumption and implementation of standards are going to be impacted with the use of smart standards?
Yeah, that's really a great question. In my work, and let me go back to the example of a standard for, let's say, a fastener, a bolt, something, the part you would use in a product. We're going to turn that data into what they call a digital twin of the real item. And so the full definition of that standard contains of all the material properties and the shape and the finish, all this other stuff has to be known and understood by that model, and that model is going to go right into our product definition. And we don't want to do a lot of other manipulation of it. We want to be able to consume that standard, trust the representation of it, and put it right into our product. The same thing is true for materials. Although materials don't have a visual shape, they still have a lot of material properties and that are important for the digital construction of an aircraft, say, that it knows what materials are touching other materials and what the strengths of those materials are, so that when we run simulations of how we build a product or how the product performs, all that information is known as if it were the real, complete, true item in the world. And the standard will be a digital, what they call a digital twin, or a digital representation of the real thing. So in that sense, things that are products, things you can hold in your hand, that part is really important. The other thing that we see is in standards that are more like lists of instructions or lists of requirements, a lot of things that Leslie and others mentioned, sort of a SysML model for the requirements, being able to navigate those things. Let's say, for example, today you might have a standard that is 80 pages of requirements. And in those requirements, you have types and forms and grades and process A and process B. And sometime when you're going through the document, you say, well, if this is true, then skip to paragraph 14, and then you go to paragraph 14, and then you go through that, and it says, now I've got option 1 and option 2, and you have to pick one or other in order to know what else to do next. And it's, I joke about it being like one of those choose your own adventure books they used to play with, or early video games that were like that. And so being able to navigate that digitally and then condense that 80-page content into the 8 pages that I really need to do the specific job and specific task. So I think, that form of consumption, when somebody says, I'm working in this area, I've got this particular problem with these constraints applied to this set of knowledge, what do my requirements look like? Can you hide all the stuff that is not relevant to my particular application and just show me what I need and simplify that instruction, and then let me consume that into some work instruction authoring environment, or, as Leslie said, everybody wants to consume data in their own space. And so I don't want to deliver a 100-page standard. What I want to deliver is the 8 pages that are really relevant, and 8 pages representing, 8 units of content, let's say.
Ali, I would like just to jump on that. We are, and very good comments, Alton. We are in the era of AI now, and I would like just to highlight, we are in the prompt era. So I don't see any better prompt source than standards, as you were speaking about instructions, etc. So how do you see the implementation of and how companies are preparing to support integration of smart into business process, and also into in commanding machines and automated processes and platforms? How do you see that in the present and in the near future integrating with AI? What is your vision for you and Ali?
Was that question for me, Nelson?
For you, Alton, for you and Ali.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So, the most important thing at my company is product safety. And in spite of what you read in the news, we really are strongly a safety-minded company. And so, while we're certainly doing a lot of work and a lot of research and making inroads into the right way to apply AI, in our business, we really, our entire structure on how we manage requirements and conform to those requirements and validate the content and the data and accredit the software that we're using to even hold and manage and transform that data, requires a deep understanding of, what that answer is to every question. And it's got to be repeatable. And so, one of the challenges, that I've come across, in our early AI testing, let's say, is the consistency of the response. Am I always going to get exactly the very same response every single time? And, is it going to hallucinate and give me an answer that is not perfect? We could never tolerate that. At least in my company. Now, if I was making some other kind of product that human lives didn't depend on, maybe that wouldn't be such a big deal. But in our product line, I think AI could be used to help maybe do a good job of authoring and writing standards. I think it's very important to be able to go, to have AI as some kind of a tool that will help you navigate the billions of pieces of data to help you get down to, what you're really trying to find. But I would just say my core concern about early adoption is the repeatability and the consistency and the 100% accuracy of the response that comes, from any kind of search tool.
Yeah, so great. Thanks, Alton. And to add to, so fully agree with what Alton said, and to add to what Alton said, from HP's perspective, we do think that, of course, integration of smart standards is important. So we fully support the ISO IEC Smart Initiative, because without that, we wouldn't be able to integrate these standards internally. And B, we are trying to educate our internal standards users on the importance of smart, as well as, of course, employing Gen AI and other techniques to make our internal processes better and improve them in a way that they can be integrated more easily with what Smart offers. So I don't think we are there yet. We are still in the process of making those changes and learning more about it, making sure that our users are more educated. That this is why we actively participate in Smart standards. But there's a need, and the need is, of course, for us to simplify our processes, our internal processes and operations, but to also, to go back to the point of reducing inefficiencies, right? Of taking the information from the PDF, coming up with the work instruction, and then implementing that for the testing and other purposes. So good question, Nelson. Let me move, while we're talking about AI, can I ask my panelists to share their view on how AI is going to help with the digital transformation overall when we look at Smart standards? So Leslie, Nelson, anyone would like to share their view?
Well, I can say that, SAE has been using natural language processing models like large language models to try to parse out and understand standards. I'd say we've had mixed results. I know some companies have also used other technologies that are AI-based, like OCR and such. I think that we still have a long way to go. And many of you on this webinar have seen standards, have read standards. You know that they can be hard for a human to read, much less for a machine to read. And we're seeing very, very different results with different types of standards. Some are coming through pretty well, and some are just a mess with incomplete requirements, missing requirements when we focus on, the requirement identification. So I think AI is a tool, and we're going to keep using it as a tool. But I think, as Alton said, it's also, it has limitations, and you have to recognize those limitations. And I think that part of what you have to do is to prepare to mitigate those limitations up front. And that means a variety of things. It means how you actually author standards, and the actual structure of sentences down to, and structure of tables and so forth, I think is important to think of ahead of time. I think it's also important to think about, what information in the standard do you want to pull out, because as I mentioned before, there's a lot of different types of information in standards, and you need to, as much upfront tagging and identification of that can be done, then the more accurate any large language models will be that leverage that information and see how the various pieces of information are communicated. So requirement statement, a lot of people say, well, you identify requirements with shall statements. Well, they're not all in shall statements. And it's not always that black and white. So you do need to think about that and plan ahead, so that you can get the best results from leveraging the tool. When you think about any tool, I'm going to use a sander, I'm going to paint a wall or something, or I'm going to paint a car, but I need to do prep work for that. I need to prepare, I need to sand, I need to make sure the surface is clear of dirt and clean and so forth. And I think that people need to be aware that these tools can be powerful and they can offer efficiencies, but if you don't do that proper prep work, then you're going to end up with a pretty badly painted car.
Yeah, great perspective, Leslie. Yeah, go ahead, Nelson.
I would like to see that at the user's perspective in the end, not just in our perspective as publishers or editors, but for example, we have machines taking decisions, and today we are smartifying our content, but there will come a day where we are going to develop content especially for machines, pure machines, So we will have to write standards with the requirements, with the data to be interpreted purely for machines. And this will be great because the AI at that level will have to interpret and take decisions in compliance with the data that we're sending. And also, for example, even if it's not that level, for example, metrology or testing, depending on how we prepare now the data, and as Alton said previously, we might be able to create digital twins and some Industry 4.0 simulations. So because we will be able to prompt things to better AI applications. So it will be very interesting to see another use of standards to bring simulations up. So I foresee that maybe in the future.
Hey, thank you, Nelson. So just a note for everybody, we are now entering a live Q&A session. So we are happy to take any questions from the audience. Just feel free to raise your hand or post a question in the chat. I'm just trying to see if anybody has their hand raised. If not, let me just, while you're thinking about your questions, let me just bring up another topic on education and training that is needed for standards committee members to adapt to SMART, and would like our panelists to share their views on, what you think, how much education is needed and what sort of education is needed.
Well, for now, for the current moment, I feel here that our committees, they are needing more structured training and education in the OSD. OSD is a great platform. I think is the backbone for SMART. The OSD stands for Online Standards Development, that is being developed by IEC and ISO. Great initiative. It brings the SMART from start, but I think people are having a hard time to shift the mind model from the Word PDF style to a shared collaborative online platform. And so we need to really strengthen this cultural shift.
I can jump in a little bit here. I have a slightly different perspective because I don't think we should focus on any one particular tool. I think that we need to focus education on basic principles right now, principles of how to write more digital ready content, whether it's with OSD or another tool, because there's a lot of different tools out there that people are using to try to are looking at investigating to look at how to create content in a more digital ready format. So I do think that there's a lot of things that the SAE has learned, and I talk a lot about that at various conferences. And I know ISO and IEC and other organizations who have started to experiment with making their standards content more digital. There's a lot of lessons learned. Andreas raised some very good points earlier about table structure and data within tables. No one is handling that very well right now. Almost everyone I've talked to has been looking at having table data as JPEGs because, you can represent table data in HTML, and that's fine from a formatting and viewability, but it's not good from a data analysis perspective. I was recently just talking with someone from a government organization, and the U.S. government's there's several organizations within the U.S. government that are really focused on digital transformation, especially when it comes to requirements analysis and model-based acquisition and so forth. And I think that there's going to be a real focus on how to digitize table data over the course of the next year, because it's a major concern for a lot of us, because that's where a lot of the critical data is that you need to test against, the tolerances and so forth. I see Alton has his hand up, so he probably wants to chime in here and has a better perspective.
Oh, I don't know that it's better, but in fact, I'm sure it's not better. It's just another point. So I mean, kind of getting to the question about the people who are on these committees that write these standards, I've heard, in various conversations, not in this room, but, a lot of concern that we're really going to burden these committees with a lot of extra work, because now they have a lot of digital formats to be aware of. And, and my experience is really kind of the opposite. The structure of standards, it varies so much from standard to standard today. And when you organize that data into a more sort of universal forms, then it becomes easier, I think, for someone who is trying to control and manage and proofread, your content, to say, yes, I see, and everyone's reading things the same way, and you don't have, like I was telling before, when you have to choose your own adventure to see if you got the story right, laying out the data in some digital formats, I think, and with the tools that assist the interpretation of that, I think it'll be not a difficult transition. If we're good at authoring, we should be in delivering data, the proofreading of it and the construction of it, I don't think will be too different. And the people who are on these committees, the real experts on whatever that topic is, they know that data model for the content that they're working on. So, yeah. And, you guys can see I have a gray beard. This is harder for me than it is for, somebody who's just getting out of college today. They're born into this world. This is a little easier for early career people. I think it's going to be a good adaptation environment, and not one that we should be worried about or stressed about. We're switching to smart standards because the rest of the world is ready for it today. They want to consume it that way, and the people who know this content, they live in that world already too. So that's just a
Great point, Alton. And I'm going to go to the question from Tony Field in the chat. But before that, I just want to mention what Nelson brought up about OSD, and the fact that IEC Academy has launched a number of training sessions on OSD, and in my view, have been very useful. I don't know, David, if you want to add further to that. All right, well then in that case, let me take a question from Tony Field in the chat. His question is, has the main emphasis of the Smart Standards project so far been to turn the current portfolio into smart standards, or look towards a new paradigm of smart standards in greenfield environment without the encumbrance of managing the legacy? Who wants to take that on?
If you don't mind,
I
I'll
jumped
blurt out.
ahead a little bit and put something into the chat.
Yeah, I'd like to blurt that out. That is a big debate inside my company as to when is that the right thing to do. And at least in my business, we still have to support products that were designed years ago, and with standards that are going to live for a long, long time. And so I think we need, we definitely need to be able to do both jobs. I haven't really seen a case where there's new content that just is completely inappropriate for our old models, and we have to find a way to, address those things. I think it's tempting to think about it, but I think we have to be able to transform our data, and maybe it'll be incomplete and we may have to go back and improve those standards after we figure out what could they have been instead of what they are now. But I think the old is going to drag along with us, through the new. That's personal opinion.
Sure.
Well, just to add on, and Ali, I apologize, I'm slow on the video and mute buttons. But from an IEC ISO Smart perspective this year, and what we did last year was put in place transformation pipelines that begin to take our existing content and transform it into digital models, data, if you will. Our plan is that we will continue that, and that we will transform all of our existing content into that smart content, into that smart data. At the same time, in parallel, we're working to improve OSD, both from the ways that Leslie noted relative to how we author requirements and author tables and author other components of standards, but also incorporating other smart features and content into the authoring process. However, we fully recognize that it will be many years before every project is being run through OSD, and we can't wait to start delivering smart. So we have an idea and a concept of how we create transformation pipelines, how we run that transformation in parallel and continuously, and how we use AI to help assist it. I think the biggest challenge we have right now is thinking about how we engage experts in the validation of that transformed content to ensure that it's at the same level of quality that the original standards were, meeting the expectations that I think Alton spoke about earlier from industry relative to having the same answer every time. So we're definitely taking our existing content and transforming it.
Great, thanks, David. I see a question from Raymond on interoperability, and I'll ask Alton to respond to that. But in few minutes that we have left, I think let me just take a question from David. His question is, who benefits from the status quo, and who and or what are the resistors to make the change happen? Does anybody wants to take that on?
I mean, I'm happy to share from my perspective. I think if you look at industry today, I think if you look at SDOs today, we have grown up around the processes that are in place, and it's no different than any other organization, right? You take finance organization that's moving to a new ERP, you're going to encounter resistance. I implemented a brand new CRM system for a bank whenever they were using a mainframe green screen, and you have resistance, not because it's not a better system, but because it's a change. And I think that that's a lot of the resistance that we have, which is it's a change to how people work. And that's not easy, no matter what kind of situation you are in. So I don't think that I wouldn't call out any one stakeholder, any one group and say they're the problem. I think we as an as a system have a significant amount of change that's in front of us, and it's going to be difficult. Now, I think we have certain characteristics of our industry that are a little more challenging, right? I think within IEC and ISO, if we looked at diversity within our expert group, we don't have the diversity of age that we'd like to see there. We don't have general diversity across that we'd like to see, and that contributes to the challenge of change across that. And so who benefits from the status quo? Everybody who's been making it work for the last 20 years. I mean, it was working. They were getting value out of it. Otherwise, we would have changed it 20 years ago. And to now say, hey, we're going to have to change that, that's tough. So from my perspective, that it's just a general change resistance.
Okay, thanks. Nelson?
Just to quickly pick on that, I think also we need to consider that there are different maturity levels of the markets around the world. I mean, there are countries and sectors that are more mature, maybe to assimilate. There is a clear need for smart standards, and there are parts of the world that this might not be that clear. So people are asking themselves, oh, why should I change and make this shift with the risks and investments if this is not clear for me? I have been hearing this in my region here. So, but I think it's a question of time, maturity, and evolution.
This brings us to the end of this webinar. I think this has been an awesome interaction with all your with all the attendees on SMART, and thank you to all the panelists and speakers. Let me just hand it over to Virat for some closing remarks before we end the session.
Thank you, Ali. First of all, I would like to thank you, Ali, for initiating, organizing, and moderating this fascinating webinar. There was a lot of very interesting information. I'm sure if we'll meet again in a few months, we'll get more insights on this topic, and we should keep on track on this very interesting topic. Thank you, David. Thank you, Leslie, Alton, and Nelson for participating, and thank you all for joining us. See you in IFAN's next webinar. Thank you very much.